Megan is great about getting that out to folks shortly after this event, and it will also be in our YouTube channel. So welcome back everyone who participated in sessions 1 and 2, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time tonight for session 3. I'm Jane Field. I'm the Executive Director of the Maine Council of Churches. We're an ecumenical partnership of 7 mainline Protestant denominations whose roots are in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. And that includes Episcopalians, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Quakers, Unitarian Universalists, United Church of Christ, and United Methodist. Our member denominations have 437 local congregations and 55,000 members here in Maine. The Council's mission is to inspire congregations and individuals to unite in building a culture of justice, compassion, and peace. I'm going to share my screen with you now, and I feel like an old-time TV announcer to say, and now a word from our sponsors. The first is Mainecare. We are a proud member organization of Mainecare, and that is a group much like United Way, who works through workplace giving campaigns to raise funds for nonprofit organizations here in the state that believe an equitable and just Maine is worth working for. And since 1989, they've actually raised over $6 million for groups like ours, and we are sure grateful for their support. We're also grateful for a grant from the Synod of the Northeast of the Presbyterian Church USA, who gave us a generous grant to help offset some of the administrative costs of this program. So thank you, Synod of the Northeast. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen with you and thank the members of our planning committee who planned the advocacy series for this year. There were 5 members from our board of directors: Evelyn Johnson Moore, who is also the co-chair of our public policy committee, Carolyn Lambert, our vice president, Alan Ewing Merrill, Marge Kilkell, and Mike Seavey. And joining them has been Izzy Ostrowski from our trusted partner organization, Preble Street Faith Advocacy Network. Running our registration platform, our database, our communications, tonight running tech is our indispensable office administrator, Megan Akers. And we are so thankful to all of those folk. I'm also grateful to my colleague, Reverend Sarah Ewing Merrill. She's the lead pastor at Hope Gateway in Portland. She's designed and is going to lead us in a time of centering and prayer right now. I invite you to mute your microphone unless you're a worship leader. I'm going to do the same so that we can center ourselves and prepare for tonight. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Jane. It's good to be here with all of you. I invite you to be fully present right where you are. Breathe in and breathe out. Tonight, the scripture that I'd like to share with you is one from Hebrew texts, but it is also one that might be familiar because it's one that Jesus is quoted as sharing right at the beginning of his ministry. So hear these words from the book of Isaiah in the 61st chapter. The Lord God's Spirit is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. God has sent me to bring good news to the poor, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim release for captives and pardon for prisoners. God sent me to announce the year of God's grace, a celebration of God's destruction of our enemies, and to comfort all who mourn. Rename them oaks of righteousness, planted by God to display God's glory. They'll rebuild the old ruins, raise a city out of the wreckage. They'll start over on the ruined cities, take the rubble left behind and make it new. I, the Lord, love justice. The whole earth sprouts and green shoots break through the well-seeded garden soil. That's what it's like when the Eternal's victory, The Lord will cause justice and praise to sprout up before all nations, for all peoples to see.
This is not political. God's agenda is not political, it's relational. The promise of the good news is not political, it's spiritual.
God comes to judge the forces of oppression without dilution, without caveat, that there are good people on both sides.
God comes to destroy the status quo, to upend our world and its injustice, to raise the lowly and bring down the mighty. This is not political, it's moral.
It's about healthcare, mass incarceration, racism, sexism, earth care, and peace. It's about empowering the disenfranchised, not blaming them.
It's about respect, not abuse. Lying, abuse, and child molestation, demeaning people, threatening war, robbing the poor to pay the rich, the worship of money, sex, and power. These are not political, they are evil.
What some want to do to our government, to our diplomacy, to common decency, God wants to do to the structures of privilege and exclusion. They are God's target. This is not politics, it's salvation.
The gentle, sweet good news is that mountains and hills will be leveled, valleys will be filled in, and rough places straightened out. And it is unwise to be standing in the way of God's bulldozers.
This may involve some elections, some protests, some laws. It will involve an altogether new empire. But it's not political, it's cosmic.
Open your heart to good news blossoming in us and take it to the streets. Amen.
As our last piece of centering today, we're going to sing a song together or listen to a song. And I would invite you, if you don't know the song, there are at least some moments where you should clap. And when we're all on mute, it works well for us to clap kind of together. So we're going to sing a song. One of my favorite justice songs is, no, I just forgot. A song must rise for the spirit to descend. We work in hand with God to create a new world.
Oh, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. Oh, a song must rise once again, singing out God's praises and glory, the faithful voices blend. Oh, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. From the mountains to the valleys, from the desert to the sea, a song must rise once again. From the voices of our leaders, the voice of you and me, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. Oh, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. Oh, a song must rise once again, singing out God's praises and glory, the faithful voices blend. Oh, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. From poverty and riches, from the voice of young and old, a song must rise once again. From the free and imprisoned, the timid and the bold, a song must rise for the spirit to descend. Oh, the song must rise for song must rise for the Spirit to descend. From every house of worship, in every faith and tongue, the song must rise once again. From the villages and cities, a new song must be sung. The song must rise for the Spirit to descend. Oh, the song must rise for the Spirit to descend. Oh, the song must rise once again. Singing out God's praises and glory, the faithful voices blend. Oh, the song must rise for the Spirit to descend.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a good way to prepare our hearts and minds and spirits for this evening's work. And tonight we will be staying all together in this Zoom room to do a deep dive on 3 pieces of legislation that are currently under consideration by the state legislature. And they're also being supported by the Maine Council of Churches. So we've invited policy analysts to present the specifics on these bills. And then we've invited sort of in-house theologians to join each of them to offer suggestions for how we faith-based advocates might frame what we say and how we talk about our support for the bills. Our first analyst theologian duo this evening includes Beth Pierce. Beth is the oral health coordinator at Maine Primary Care Association. She brings 20 years of medical and dental experience to that position, including extensive work with Maine's Medicaid program known as Mainecare. Beth's passion lies in program coordination and collaborating with others to improve oral health access, services, and reimbursement. And her colleague, Marge, calls her the oral health guru. So Beth, welcome. We thank you for joining us. The theologian joining Beth is Marge Kilkell, whom some of you met last time during session 2. Marge is a member of the MCC Board of Directors and a member of Christ Church Episcopal in Gardner. She currently serves as a policy program manager at Maine Primary Care Association. She's directed several nonprofits. She's worked in all levels of government. She served 16 years in the Maine legislature, 4 years as a town selectman, and most recently worked for 6 years in Washington, D.C. as a senior policy advisor to Senator Angus King. And she and her husband, Joe Murray, live in Dresden on Dragonfly Cove Farm, where they raise meat goats, poultry, and pigs for local markets. So welcome back, Marge, and you can see some of her goats in her background. So with that, I turn the floor over to the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Beth, for joining me this evening. We work together on a regular basis, and it's a delight to have her with me tonight, because if we're going to be talking about the dental bill, I know that she's the one that has that information and will be available to answer questions, and we will provide you with the information that you need to be good, strong advocates. What I've really enjoyed about these sessions is that while we may worship differently, what we share and the reason we've gathered together is a commitment to be stewards of God's creation, the land, the sea, the universe, and especially our brothers and sisters. We began this Advocacy Days program talking about why we as people of faith should be advocating for public policy, then learning about how to be advocates, and tonight we're going to focus on specific topics. To me, what's particularly important about our advocacy is that we see our role in 2 ways: by what we personally do and what we ask government to do on our behalf with the resources that we provide to them. And that's the message that you take to the legislature, is that we ask government to do certain things that we believe are the right things to do. And we are going to be strong advocates of that because of our faith. Our faith drives us to this position. Our faith provides us with the strength to be often in these positions. And the bill that we're going to talk about tonight is a bill to provide adult dental services through the Mainecare program. And Beth and I both work for the Maine Primary Care Association. And for many of you, especially in rural areas, you know that there are federally qualified health centers in a lot of communities. As a matter of fact, there are more than 70 of them. And we work with all 70 of those healthcare providers to make sure that they've got the resources they need in order to provide high quality primary care to the people in their communities. And by primary care, we mean regular health care that you would expect, but also behavioral health care and oral health care. And at this point, I will turn it over to Beth to talk about oral health care.
Thank you, Marge. And I put together a brief PowerPoint just to kind of go over what Mainecare currently offers for adult and pediatric patients, as well as what this bill proposes to do. So let me just bring that up and make sure I do it in the right presentation. Well, didn't we just have a conversation about this?
We just had that conversation. That's
There
right.
we go. Is everybody seeing that first slide? Okay. All right. I see some nods. All right. So the bill that I'm going to speak about is actually titled LD 996, and it is an act to improve dental health access for Maine children and adults with low incomes. So in other words, any recipients of the Mainecare benefit. And basically, what we're looking at right now, Mainecare kind of divides its coverage for oral health care by age, not by condition or anything else. So if you're a child under 21 years of age, you get a comprehensive benefit. All your preventative, your cleaning and your fluorides and your x-rays, as well as your restorative, your fillings, anything oral surgical related extractions and so forth, as well as orthodontics. But once you hit 21, those benefits change. Because there's no more preventative services without some pretty big hoops to jump through as far as prior authorizations and justification of those procedures. Basically, care is delivered episodically. It usually means that somebody has an issue at hand, they go into a practice, they have a limited exam, and just the x-ray that's needed to diagnose the problem. Typically, the next step is that that's followed up by an appropriate care that treats the issue that was diagnosed when it meets the Mainecare criteria. And the most common criteria that dentists will identify as a reason to justify the treatment would be pain, infection, and imminent tooth loss. There's other criteria, but that's the most common one. And so in other words, this leaves it up to the dentist to decide at that point what the appropriate service is. It could be an extraction, pulling your tooth out, a filling, a root canal with or without a crown, which is basically what some people call caps, or a crown that goes over your existing tooth. But the most common misunderstanding is that it is simply untrue that Mainecare will only cover extractions. They can do more. The dentist does have the right to make these decisions. But the biggest thing here is the preventative care that's really important is not readily given to anyone except children under 21 years of age. And that's the most important thing, is to prevent the big things from happening later. So what I did here is, in this bill, there are a lot of components, and it speaks to having groups to get together to advocate and do work. But the line that was most important in context to what we're talking about here is what I took from the bill, which says other comprehensive preventative diagnostic and restorative dental services to 20. Oh, you know, I copied that and maybe I misspeaced. Up to 21 years of age to maintain good oral health and overall health in accordance to the rules adopted by, I'm sorry, there's something strange in that line there, so I apologize for those pieces. But basically, why is it important that all people that have Mainecare as a benefit get good oral health? It's basically because if you have poor oral health, it negatively impacts chronic health conditions such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and the health of pregnant mothers. All those those three primary diagnoses are far less well controlled without having adequate oral health. I mean, there's studies that extensively show the impacts of gum disease on these particular diagnoses. And of course, the other piece here is that people with restored dentition are more confident, healthier, and find employment easier. So basically, the Maine Primary Care Association's position here is to continue to advocate for what's best for the people and the health centers that we support. So in addition to the work that we've done in the past, what we've done this year, because if you were following along with any of this last year, due to COVID, the legislature didn't, it ended early, and some of the bills, and there had been one with the same concept last year that had made it all the way to the appropriations. So they were discussing money. And unfortunately, that's where the bill basically died. So we had to resurrect it appropriately here after Easter. And actually augment it. So what happened this year is the subcommittee of our advocacy group, which I'm part of, and they got together with the Health Policy Institute, which is a division of the American Dental Association, and they worked together to quantify the savings that could be had. In the past, these bills have focused on savings that Mainecare would achieve if they offered oral health and diverted people from getting their dental care in the emergency department. But this goes bigger than that. We now can speak to the fact that if they simply provide this very important overall health benefit to adults, they will see savings in the cost to manage the diabetic patients that are in Mainecare, those with cardiovascular disease, and the moms that are pregnant, because untreated periodontal or gum disease can lead to preterm births, low birth weights, and it's just, there's just so much that bacteria in your mouth leads to if it's left untreated. So there are some really significant things that would be impacted with this bill going forward. So not only would Mainecare save money in terms of the reduction of the medical expenses, as I just outlined, but, you know, this would benefit the state and the recipients, and we would also have a greater impact to the state overall in terms of better employability for the individuals that receive these benefits. And so the last slide that I have here, and I will include the slide deck so that if anybody wants to review it at their leisure or have my contact information, you'll have that. So I am the oral health coordinator with the Maine Primary Care Association. I have worked with Mainecare in a couple different capacities, and I've also managed nonprofit dental centers prior to coming to the PCA. So this gives me a great opportunity to take some of my knowledge and bring it forth in terms of advocacy, and hoping to make some really important changes that we'd all like to see in the state of Maine and to the very deserving people in the state of Maine. So that concludes what I have to share for a presentation at this point, but I am certainly open to any questions or comments that anybody might have.
And thank you, Beth. And I think one of the things that is particularly important about what Beth's been talking about is that it really, there are both the warm, fuzzy reasons that this bill is important because people need dental care, but there's also the financial benefit of doing this. And people that we all know and people who serve in the legislature come at issues differently. And so for those people who are very fiscal minded and really that's the first thing they want to hear, to be able to present a case to them about why this is beneficial financially allows you to get to the same end. And there are other people who just believe that this is the right thing to do and we should do it, frankly, even if there was a cost to doing it. So it's, as you're moving forward and thinking about even other pieces of legislation, it's really important to be able to put all of this together in a way that you can communicate it to people who are looking at these issues from very different directions and very different perspectives. That's what creates success. And the other piece of that is that there is a tendency on certainly my part and lots of others to sort of be judgmental of those people who look at things in the way that we don't look at them. And I think by creating a balanced conversation, a balanced reason why bills are important, you can present that information in a way that is completely non-judgmental. For those people who want to pick up the financial piece first, that's fine. For those that pick up the warm fuzzy piece first, that's fine. The goal is to get where we need to get. And one of the things that Beth has done a masterful job on over the last few months is really pulling together just incredible information about the impact on pregnant moms, the impact on cardiovascular disease and diabetes. And so it goes way beyond just, is it going to cost less because people aren't going to the emergency room, which is frankly the argument that we've used for years. So, so I think there's sort of a lesson in this bill that even goes beyond the bill. But we are happy to take questions. You can either put them in the chat. I have the chat up and can see that, or if there's someone that wishes to, I don't know how we'd unmute.
I've got a question. So if I were speaking from my faith, here I am, a good Presbyterian, hiding out with Lutherans these days, but still a good Presbyterian, wanting to talk to my senator or my representative or people on the committee. What are some things that come to your mind that I just speak from my heart? I wouldn't need to get down in the weeds even, but are there sacred texts or doctrines or traditions maybe we could draw on from our faith that would help us talk about this?
Interesting that you should ask that. One of the things that that I pulled up earlier, and I think it's partly on this issue, but in 2 Corinthians, there's a line. It's, our desire is not that others might be relieved while you are hard pressed, but that there might be equality. At the present time, your plenty will supply what they need, so that in turn their plenty will supply what you need. The goal is equality, as it is written, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. And part of how that spoke to me on this issue is the idea of employment. People who are struggling with dental issues have a very difficult time being employed. And I think we can talk about that. We want people to live into their fullest. That's who we are and where we're coming from. And in order for people to live into their fullest, they need help. And they need not just, while they need vaccinations and primary care in the traditional sense, they also need oral health and they also need behavioral health care. And that when we work to provide that, we're not only doing something that is supporting our brothers and sisters, but it in its own way comes back around to support all of us. And that was one that really sort of struck me as something, and I would offer it to others who might have a thought around that. Or Beth,
Well, the first thing that comes to mind as you share that, Marge, is equity. Equity and equality are not always the same. Equity means we're obviously meeting people where they are and helping them get their needs met. And certainly COVID has totally exacerbated and highlighted all those inequities. So as awful as it has been,
yes,
I prefer to look at the things that have come out of it. In highlighting some of these issues that didn't get the adequate attention is one of those things. And I noticed a couple comments in chat. And as far as access in Maine goes, that is still challenging. But I'm part of many groups. Anything that's oral health related, I jump right in. We do have a connection with UNE School of Dentistry, and we also have a workforce manager now. And so we're looking globally at, what's going on, with our workforce. How can we support these people? There's also a couple other bills out there in legislation that speak to credentialing of foreign trained healthcare providers. In the past, there's been some challenges about people that are very qualified. They just happen to be an immigrant from another country, and they're having a hard time getting their education recognized. So that is being looked at. That's another way to augment our workforce and get some really important people there. In terms of reimbursement, Mainecare is looking at a variety of different things. They're looking at a value-based, quality-based change in potential payment. That's ongoing. It's very convoluted. I'm not going to get into the details of that. But the other piece to that, when you're talking about a dentist that's getting reimbursed via Mainecare, they're also doing a rate evaluation, and they have identified dental rates as being very low. So we are actively following that and advocating for those rates to be increased so that we can keep these very important providers working and functional.
And we have a question in chat. In advocating for the bill, is it more effective to advocate for Mainecare related bills at the same time or keep them separate? And this person specifically looking at the Mainecare benefits to immigrant and asylum seekers and undocumented neighbors throughout the state. My advice would be it's perfectly fine to talk to a member about several bills, but keep your arguments separate and keep the numbers separate so that you can, just be clear that there are other things that you're talking about. So I would do that, but I think it's perfectly fine. I mean, the whole issue of Mainecare is how government helps to provide health for people who are not in a position to have it any other way. And our Medicaid, our Mainecare expansion was so long waited. I was in DC in 2013 when we implemented the Affordable Care Act, and it was heartbreaking to look at the number of people in the state of Maine who otherwise could have had access to health care and didn't. And it's fundamental. It's Maslow, it's everything. And if we are going to, in fact, be a robust state, we need people to be healthy, and this is the way it's done. And it's not about anyone's status, it's not about their age, it's not about other things. It's about, can they afford healthcare or not? And if they can't, this is one way that it's provided. I would also point out that at the health centers around the state, the federally qualified health centers, one of the things, we receive federal funds for part of the work at the health centers so that we can in fact accept people regardless of their ability to pay. There certainly are people who don't qualify for Mainecare and still can't afford health insurance. And there's a sliding scale that's available for them at health centers. And I've put our briefing book in the chat, and you can download that and see that, and you can reach out to either Beth or I to talk about anything about health centers, because that's really important.
We've got about 30 seconds left, so you can get some last comments in, and then we'll switch over to a new bill.
Well, and Bruce, thank you for sharing about your daughter being a uni dental student. That's fabulous. I think that's one of the best things that could have happened to the state of Maine, is to have the school here. And I hope that as she progresses, she'll consider working at one of our community health centers.
And it makes me smile because I'm now on the board of trustees for UNE, and I'm really proud of our dental program. So I think there are great things going on in the state of Maine, and it really is just a matter, as I said earlier, about us advocating for government to do what we wish government to do with the resources that we are providing. And that's our call. Thank you, Jane. I didn't go over too badly, huh?
No, you were right on the money there. I really want to thank both of you, Beth and Marge, for joining us tonight and sharing your expertise, and for being so available to our participants afterward if they have further questions or need additional help before talking to their legislators. And thank you both for all of the important work you do every day. See, my timer just went off. That was my timer, so you were right on the money. Our next presenters this evening are discussing both a climate justice bill and the tribal sovereignty bill. Kathleen Meal is Director of Policy and Partnerships at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance, where one of her roles is to convene and facilitate Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition, and EPC is a trusted partner organization of the Maine Council of Churches. Throughout her career as a clean energy policy advocate at the Acadia Center, as an energy efficiency professional, as an educator at public and independent schools, and as a candidate for public office, Kathleen has worked to build healthy communities that are environmentally friendly and economically strong. And Kathleen is joining us from Camden, where she lives. The theologian joining Kathleen is Reverend Doretta Colburn. She's a minister in the United Church of Christ, currently serving as pastor of the Waterford Congregational Church. She and her husband live in Waterford. I see a theme here tonight with our theologians because she is also a farmer. They live on her husband's farm where his family's been since 1904. And they raise bison, laying hens, grow organic produce, and bake artisan breads. In her 27 years of ministry, Doretta has always blended her faith with passion for the environment. And she was a middle school science teacher before she got her MDiv at Yale Divinity School. She currently hosts a monthly program through her church entitled Climate Conversations, What Can We Do? And that's actually reached beyond the local community of Waterford and is challenging lots of folks to get together and work for climate justice. She is Maine Council of Churches' newly appointed representative to the Environmental Priorities Coalition, and she serves on our Public Policy Committee. And we are delighted to welcome you both here tonight. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Kathleen. I'm going to let you get started in doing the bill, but I'm just delighted to be here and looking forward to this.
Thank you all so much for inviting me to be here this evening. It's just been a wonderfully inspiring and beautiful evening so far. So hope we can, Doretta and I will do our best to keep that going. And I thought I would start by giving you a little bit of background on the Environmental Priorities Coalition. So hopefully you can see that, and I can get this back again. All right. So the EPC has been around since 2004, and the coalition is convened by Maine Conservation Alliance. A little bit of the origin story here. Back in 2004, there was a bill before the Maine legislature to clean up water quality standards on the Androscoggin River. And it was one of those issues where the environmental community was aligned. We aren't always, but this was one of those moments where everybody agreed this was the way to go. We had friends in power and every reason to believe that bill would sail through. But it didn't. Without that sort of concerted effort and intentional organizing, something that we all cared about failed to make it over the finish line. And Maine Conservation Alliance took a beat at that moment and said, you know, we all believe that collective action is more powerful than working on our own. But we often think it'll just happen if we are aligned, if we are clear about what we believe, we'll work together effectively. And of course, once you've been part of one coalition or another, you know that's rarely the case. It's a lot of work to get along and row in the same direction, even with our friends, right? So we need that sort of backbone organization. And that's the work that MCA provides for the coalition. We really focus on those deep partnerships, on sharing resources, on coming together to identify our priorities before the Maine legislature and for the longer term, and to speak with one voice. Here you see all of the organizations that are members of the EPC. And I hope the first thing that jumps out at you is that there is no one typical EPC member. We've got big environmental organizations, we've got teeny tiny community organizations. We have organizations that focus exclusively in Maine, and organizations with a national or even international presence. But what unites us is our commitment to protecting Maine's ecosystems and natural resources, to safeguarding access to public lands, to reducing toxic pollution and tackling climate change, and to really advancing social and environmental justice and all that means to our communities. Obviously, not every organization has an equal focus on each of these elements, but there's a lot of crossover. And one of the things I enjoy the most is when I send out the annual survey of, check the parts of our mission that are most core to your organization. You can't really predict. It's not an even line of, oh, well, these guys are definitely going to care about those issues. It sort of made me think during Marge and Beth's presentation about, who expected the Maine Council of Churches to weigh in on dental health? Well, obviously, hearing that presentation, it is a no-brainer, but we don't always know which issues are going to resonate with organizations, with individuals, with decision makers. The big work that we do together is centered on the legislative session, and we come together every year to develop an agenda of priority bills that all 30-something organizations stand behind and speak with one voice on. And Doretta and I are going to talk through 2 of those priorities today, but I thought I'd give you a little hint or a peek at all 9. There's no magic formula. We really do set our agenda based on what's relevant and where the opportunities are. Last year, we only had 4 priorities on our common agenda. This year, there was a lot we didn't get to with COVID and the legislature adjourning early last year. So this year is a big list. I will drop a link in the chat to our, let me see, actually, I'll do that right now, to the EPC's website where you can actually find, now I just have to find the chat. Oh, well, I'll do this after I stop sharing. We have fact sheets for each of these bills. But today, we're going to dig into 2. The first is to phase out toxic PFAS chemicals. I would tell you what PFAS stands for if I had any hope that I could pronounce it correctly, but instead I will just tell you this. It's a class of chemicals that is used in tons and tons of everyday products. If you get a food wrapper that has that sort of shine to make it grease resistant, there's PFAS involved there. If you have Teflon coated fry pans, there's PFAS on there. It's in food packaging, textiles, car seats. I mean, this thing is everywhere. And that's not great because it's associated with all sorts of health risks. Certain cancers, neurodevelopmental issues, all sorts of things. And of course, as with so many of these bad things in the environment, the impacts are worse for the most vulnerable people in our society and our communities. So we really look at this as certainly an environmental issue. PFAS are what they call forever chemicals in that they don't break down in the environment. You actually have to physically remove them. So cleanup is really expensive. And that has all sorts of problems. But we also look at this as a justice issue because of the disproportionate impacts and disproportionate health impacts. This bill I like because, or this issue I like because it really highlights the fact that with a lot of our most stubborn challenges, we are not working on one front at a time. We are working on from lots of different directions trying to solve this problem. So there are bills before the legislature to mandate disclosure. If you are a manufacturer and you use these chemicals, you should have to tell the DEP, and you should have to pay a reporting fee. And that fee could help fund some of that very expensive PFAS cleanup. We also have a whole category of testing. One of the really tragic things about PFAS is it finds its way into groundwater and into private wells. So there are lots of folks who are exposed that way. Unfortunately, even if you send your water sample off to be tested from your well, PFAS testing is not part of that regimen of tests. Because it's so expensive, it's just not in the usual list. So we need to do some special planning around how to make sure we're testing for PFAS. You'll see there's a piece, actually, there was a public hearing yesterday on a bill to designate PFAS as a hazardous substance. That's one of those, it sounds really boring, but actually unlocks a whole bunch of resources that are available to clean up hazardous sites. All of those things are happening, and the bill that we really want to talk about tonight that is prioritized by the Environmental Priorities Coalition is one to phase out PFAS altogether, to say this class of chemicals is so bad, we should not be using it wherever alternatives exist, and to start that pretty immediately, so that by 2030, there are no what they call unavoidable uses of PFAS. Like anything, there are a couple of things that the PFAS class of chemicals is better for than anything else that on the market. But anytime it can be replaced, it should be, and we should be working towards developing alternatives where they don't exist right now. I'm going to let Doretta talk a little bit, and I will stop sharing and then start again when we move to the next bill, and I'll use that break to get the fact sheets into the chat.
Okay, wonderful. And now I did see a little question come up about what the LD number is, but it does not have an LD number yet. Correct, Kathleen? Can you share a little bit? That's still in process.
That's right. One of the things, everything is moving really slowly this legislative session. So a lot of bills that have been drafted, worked with, the legislators who introduced them have been working on them, and advocates are organizing around. They may not have been printed by the revisor's office. Marge was absolutely right in saying you got to cite that LD number if you want lawmakers to know what you're talking about. So I realize I'm giving you a fool's errand this evening in that I can't give you an LD number, but I promise to keep you posted as when that bill comes out and as we have more information. And I'll put that link to our website right there in the chat now.
Perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you for giving us such an overview. I know that we are all gathered here because we care. We care about people. We care about living things, creatures great and small, even black flies when they come. We might not like them very much, but they're important, right? We care about our environment and the air we breathe, the water that we drink, and that means so much to sustain us and sustaining us, the soil, the water, the land beneath our feet that nourishes us. We care about each of these things because I believe that we realize that we are part of this whole. There's this common thread that runs through all of creation that draws us together in this magnificent tapestry into which we are all a part, and all matter. Everything matters. And we care because our faith, whatever tradition that we might have, that we might come from, they teach us that we have a responsibility to protect, to use wisely, to value and to value the sense of awe and wonder, every aspect of this amazing created order in which we are a part of. As mentioned earlier, I was a science teacher, but I grew up in a Christian home in New Jersey. I was Presbyterian until I came to Connecticut, and I couldn't find a Presbyterian church and became Congregational. Well, my parents were very involved in church as church leaders. My mom was church secretary when I went off to kindergarten until she passed away when she was 59. And so church, this sense of community and faith was such an integral part of my upbringing, but so was the outdoors. My parents always had us out camping, hiking, biking, canoeing, skiing, whatever it was. I went up Mount Washington when I was 5 years old, my first trek up Mount Washington, of many treks I took later. But this love for environment and my faith have always blended together. As a matter of fact, when I was a science teacher and left that to become a minister, some people scratched their heads and said, well, how are you doing that? You know, science and the environment and then to ministry, how do they connect? Science and religion are separate. As a matter of fact, just to give a little background, Catherine Hayhoe addressed that issue. She's a climate scientist, very active and vocal climate scientist, but she's also an evangelical Christian. Her husband is a pastor in their evangelical church. And she says it's a common perception that science and religion are mutually exclusive, but there are many scientists who would consider themselves to be spiritual people. Not only that, but in the case of climate change, a scientific issue with strong moral implications and difficult decisions to be made, it is essential, she says, to connect the science to our values. And for many of us, our values come from our faith. And I would imagine all of you on this call tonight agree with that and understand that. We come from different places, but it's our values and our faith that has informed us of those values. And that is why we seek to speak out and do what we can to make positive change. You know, across the board, various faith perspectives see creation as a divine design, a holy other that shaped all that is, and therefore to do harm to any aspect of that creative order, including its creatures, is to do harm to that relationship with the divine. We are to preserve, to protect, and to perpetuate the balance of this created order rather than disrupt it to the benefit of a few. You know, whether there is a sense of partnership or stewardship with all of creation, it is a matter of faith that requires us to act when we witness injustice in any form. A Hindu spiritual leader, Amma, has said, there is an inseparable bond between man and nature. For man, there cannot be an existence removed from nature. And then the Quran even says, devote thyself single-mindedly to the faith, and thus follow the nature designed by Allah, the nature according to which he has fashioned mankind. There is no altering the creation of Allah. And many of us, of course, reflect on Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and it was good. So why are we messing with it? It was good. And in the book of Job, as Job questions God's authority and power and all-encompassing awe, it says, but ask the animals and they will teach you. I love this part. Ask the animals and they will teach you, or the birds of the air, and they will tell you. Or speak to the earth and it will teach you. Or let the fish of the sea inform you, which of all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. We even know that Pope Francis took it seriously, this concern about the environment, to say that our earth needs constant concern and attention. Each of us has a personal responsibility to care for creation, this precious gift which God has entrusted to us. And in that are all people. So our faith, our values, what stirs us within in the face of injustice toward earth, toward humankind, the passion that gives us voice to speak what we believe, and in the light of this forever chemicals, these PFAS, that are known to negatively affect the health of people, to pollute our water and our land, that are incredibly pervasive. They contaminate the very gift of life that we have been given. Finding our voice is none other than a faith response. Citing justice for our environment, for all people, especially those who cannot speak for themselves. As people of faith, I think that I believe that we are called to stand up, to speak up, and to act up in face of injustice. And there is clearly injustice when we consider this bill and the things like this that contaminate our environment, that contaminate the health of individuals, communities, and the earth. When people's livelihoods, when we look deeper into this bill, and you can research it, in one of the EPC Lunch and Learns, there's a wonderful, go back to the EPC site and you'll see this. Livelihoods, these people who had farms who had no idea that the sludge that they put on their farms that was promoted as something that could be done was contaminating their farms to this day, that they cannot use them to farm safely. When we cannot trust the quality of the water that we drink and the land that we live on, the food that we consume because of contamination, when we cannot feel confident that what we choose to buy for our homes, the clothes that we wear, that they might bring unwanted chemicals into our homes and affecting the health of our families and our loved ones, there's reason for us to speak up. It is imperative. It is a part of our faith that calls us to take action, to speak the truth, to stand up for those that can't speak for themselves, and to stand up for this incredible gift of life that we have been given and this environment that we have been given. And as I close, and lest you think you can't do it, lest you think you can't find that voice or the action to take, I share with you the story of Moses. When God said to Moses, I want you to go speak to Pharaoh. And Moses said, oh, no, I am not a man of eloquent words. I'm slow of tongue. I'm slow of speech. And yet God used Moses and empowered him to do the task he asked him to do. And likewise with Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, who again used the same excuse or a similar excuse. No, don't send me. I can't, I'm too young. I don't know the words to say. I don't know what to say. Well, God placed his words upon his mouth, in his mouth to speak. And so we are all called to speak from our passion. Tell our story. Tell our story. The values that drive you to find your voice. Take up a pen or the computer and write from your heart. The more each of us do this, the more positive change that we encourage, greater will be the healing of our earth, the people, and our environment. And in closing, you might remember that God said, whom shall I send? And Isaiah said, here I am, send me. May we all take that to heart. Thank you. And kind of a little sermonette there, but we'd love to take any questions that you might have. Kathleen, you're probably more adept at chat than I am. I am like, this is not my thing. They didn't teach this in seminary.
Well, I don't know how to do what you just did, which was just so beautiful and so moving. And, I was thinking when you said, Marge, that we all approach issues in different ways, and that the people we're talking to are really, they're making decisions based on different kinds of information. I hope that we can model for each other a little bit that power of teaming up, of having the legislative advocate who says, here's the nuts and bolts, here's the timeline, here's the way we're going to pay for the cleanup with the reporting fee. There are lawmakers who are absolutely looking for those details and will not get on board without them. But there are other folks who are going to hear the real call to action that Doretta just shared and say, oh, that's it. That's the thing that tells me how to vote. It's not better or worse, but we each have a role to play. And I'm just so grateful to have partners like all of you to say the things that I don't have the resources or the credibility to say. So thank you.
Thanks, both of you. And I saw lots of amens populate the chat box. And I also saw a question about what's the other bill. Well, the other bill is not a climate bill. My understanding is that we're going to pivot now, and it's about the 20-minute mark, so it's right on schedule to pivot and talk about the tribal sovereignty bill.
Perfect. All right.
I will say, however, that as much as it might not be billed as a climate bill, it really has climate justice issues definitely within it. So Kathleen, take it away.
Yeah. I don't know how much folks know about this bill, so I'll give just a little bit of background. The Wabanaki tribes in Maine signed an Indian Land Claims Settlement Act, and actually I think I've got some of this on the next slide. The Indian Land Claims Settlement of 1980 established for the tribes in Maine a different status than all 574 other federally recognized tribes in the United States. What that means is that as federal Indian law has evolved since 1980, the tribes in Maine have not benefited from any of those changes. There have been 151 federal Indian laws that have not applied to the tribes in Maine, though they have applied to 574 other tribes across the country. What happened a couple of years ago is that there was a bipartisan task force that looked at the Land Claims Settlement Act and came up with 22 changes that they recommended. It was a unanimous report from that task force. And what they laid out was a way to help support the tribes to purchase land that was theirs in the first place, but also to remove some of the barriers that had made it difficult for them to make those purchases, but also to restore the sovereign rights of the tribes. Those rights include, but are certainly not limited to, the regulation of natural resources, like setting hunting and fishing guidelines, water quality standards, a whole bunch of environmental provisions that make this a good candidate for the EPC to look at, but also have to do with violence against women and prosecution of domestic violence crimes, which goes shamefully unaddressed in a lot of tribal communities. There is also, I want to acknowledge a recommendation around gaming. That one is a lot more complicated for a lot of people. And in recognition of that, the Wabanaki Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization that where all the tribal leaders sort of come together and are working on this advocacy agenda, they acknowledged that, you know what, we'll have an easier time of it if we separate those out. So what you'll see in the legislature this year, and my understanding is that the bill should be printed by Friday, but again, I don't have an LD number to share yet. There's one bill that tackles 21 of the 22 recommendations in that report, and a separate bill that deals exclusively with the gaming. The one that the EPC has prioritized is that big sort of omnibus bill. And the EPC is working really closely with the Wabanaki Alliance on our strategy on that, on our talking points, on every aspect, because we really do want to be good partners to support this bill. A couple of weeks ago, tribal leaders did a sort of non-legislative, let's get to know each other presentation to the committee that will consider this bill. And one of the leaders said something that really stuck with me, that was, you know, how would you feel if New Hampshire came and told you what your laws should be in Maine? It's the same thing. It's a completely different jurisdiction, and it doesn't make sense. And there's a lot of understandable hurt and pain around that. These talking points you'll see here are come directly from the Wabanaki Alliance, you know, that this is Maine's greatest inequality, and that we need to stand with our tribal neighbors against oppression. That's a pretty powerful statement. The tribes have not benefited from 151 laws. I mentioned that. And, you know, one of the ones that really just gets me like a punch to the gut is when I hear some of the questions about the environmental stewardship, because of course, if and when we recognize the sovereignty of the Maine tribes, they will not be subject to Maine state law. They will be subject to federal law, as we all are. But the rules and regulations of the Maine Department of Environmental Protection will not be relevant, just as they're not relevant to the citizens of New Hampshire. And there are folks who say, well, then what if they make bad decisions? And of course, the answer is, well, the tribes have lived in relationship to this land and these waters for a heck of a lot longer than any of us. So that does not feel like a good argument to me. I put the link in here to Wabanaki Alliance, and I'll get that into the chat as well. One of the things we do in the EPC is to build each other up. And so I would strongly encourage you to check that out. I will also keep you posted as we have more details about this bill and the LD number. But I think I'll go right to Doretta and let you take over.
Oh, well, okay. Thank you for sharing all that background with us. I think I would like to acknowledge something that I've been a part of some groups that are beginning to do this regularly. And if tonight, though, if we can acknowledge that this land is the traditional, wherever we are, we're all likely to be in Maine, it's a traditional territory of the Wabanaki people. Their presence is imbued in the lands and waters surrounding us. May we nurture our relationship with our Indigenous neighbors and the shared responsibility to their homelands where we all reside today. The hooked rug you might see behind me, for some of you to see me Zooming other times, I'm usually not in this setting, but I shifted around because this rug just has spoken to me. It's something my husband's grandfather hooked over 70 years ago. And, but it reminds me the circles in this and the interconnectedness is this wovenness that draws us all together as people. we all are important in the tapestry of life. And it's something that's always been part of my understanding and my sense of faith. I remember when I was in middle school, my first act of advocacy was I had been watching a documentary, I guess, on somehow it was about the Hopi tribe in Arizona and the deplorable conditions in which they were living. And I was so angry and so frustrated. And my parents encouraged me to write a letter to my representative, which I did. So those are the early days of my advocacy. And from that point on, it's always been with me that to try to do what I could to speak up for those that have been wronged. You know, as a Christian, I'm aware of how much pain and sorrow was and in some ways still has been afflicted on others, particularly Indigenous people, in the name of that same religion. My experience as a pastor several years ago in Connecticut, I was a pastor of a church on the Mohegan land. It was owned by the Mohegan tribe, and together with the church was blended with Christian and tribal beliefs were blended together. There was a beautiful, amazing eagle feather that hung over in the archway above the pulpit, just as a reminder of the purity of ideals and the way of the tribe. But it always reminded me of the voice that we need to have for others. And in that process, there are things that I've begun to recognize in a lot of the inequities that many of the tribes kind of accepted so that they weren't driven out in the case of the people in the Mohegan tribe. But I guess what I'm trying to express here is that, again, in our faith, if we look back to our scriptures or whatever faith, whatever texts inform you, I am sure they inform you that we are interconnected. We are like this tapestry woven together. My life impacts your life and your life impacts mine. And we cannot be this collective body of people without learning to be in harmony and to respect the desires and the equality of everyone. I have gone way off script here, but I had it all written out, but I don't need to preach to you. But I think about the prophet Micah, and it says, he has told you, oh man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and walk humbly with your God. That needs to inform us. And in the Christian text, in the New Testament, Jesus was once challenged by those who were looking to trip him up being that they asked him, what was the greatest commandment? What is the greatest commandment? And he said, well, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And that was what they were looking for. However, he challenged them by saying, yes, and there's another like it, as equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those, he said, are the two of the greatest commandments, and all the laws and the prophets hang on them. And so if we take those seriously in our faith as Christians, in other traditions, as we value individualness, and then we are responsible to stand up for the equality of all people and do whatever we can to make that right. And I think when it comes to this tribal sovereignty bill, I mean, it is our opportunity to straighten things out and make them right, to work toward forgiveness and reconciliation, to begin to create a sense of healing for what has been done, and move forward into the future so that we can be that body of people respecting each other, loving each other, and valuing the individual gifts that each of us bring. So I think in closing, I just want to say that this bill is near and dear to my heart because I have worked with the tribe in Connecticut, and it just makes matters a great deal to me, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak to it. I hope that you will find your voice and share in moving forward as this does get a LG number. I'm sure it will, and it's about time that we begin this healing process in a very significant way. So
I saw a question. There's been lots of chatter in the chat room, in the chat box, with people sharing resources, particularly on decolonizing faith, on white privilege, and Christianity's relationship to the tribes. But I did see a question fly by about advocacy with the governor, if the governor has objections, and in addition to working with legislators, is there something faith-based advocates should be doing to speak to the governor about this?
That question comes from a very savvy political advocate here. It is sort of the consensus view that the biggest person we need to convince on this bill is the governor. It is likely to have enough support in the legislature, given the makeup of the legislature. We think that this bill will pass. This is a particularly frustrating challenge for, I think, a lot of us who feel so grateful and so just really supportive of Governor Mills' strong stance on climate action, the fabulous job that she has done navigating the pandemic and all of those things. And so sometimes it's hard to see something that we see as a flaw, a weakness. This bill is that for her. And in my most sort of loving interpretation of that, I really believe it's because of the work that she has done, or it's rooted in the work that she has done as Attorney General and throughout her career to protect Maine's environment. And working for strong environmental quality standards, you start to develop a little bit of ownership, feeling that like these are the rules I made, they're good rules, they're doing their job. Doesn't mean that it's appropriate to impose them on a sovereign nation. So that's my assessment. I do think, when Maine conservation voters and other EPC priority or EPC partners send out action alerts and things like that, we often will include a way for you to send an email to your state rep and your state senator. On this bill in particular, we are structuring that on the back end of our system so that all of those emails are copied to the governor as well. She really is the person who needs to hear from each of us. She did meet with tribal leaders on Friday of last week. I haven't heard anything about how that meeting went, but I know that they are in conversation, which is a really good thing.
And is it your understanding this will come up before judiciary like it did last time?
Yes. Yep. I think that's right.
You all are doing so well on time. We have about 2 minutes left. If others have questions that they want to pop into the chat, or it's hard to see everybody at once in this format. If you raised your hand, I'm not sure we'd see you in time.
I did put in the chat a link to the lunch and learn that we hosted on this bill. I would highly recommend it. The presenters on that bill for that program were Penobscot Nation Ambassador Molly and Dana, and Corey Hinton, who is both an attorney at Drummond Woodsum who leads their tribal law practice, and a Passamaquoddy tribal citizen. So what a duo. They really have both the personal connections and history with this bill, and the political and legal and sort of all of those. I mean, they're the whole package, and their presentation really was just spectacular. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that.
Yeah, I would highly recommend that. All of the lunch and learns are great, and they're videoed, so you can just watch them on your own time. But that one in particular is helpful. The question about how they ever got left out and how the Land Settlement Act came into being when it did is a long and complicated answer. It was addressed 2 years ago at the MLK dinner here in Portland, and it literally took 2 hours to explain how it happened and what the implications were. Do you guys know of a good place, an online resource where someone could get an overview of that backstory?
Corey Hinton covers some of that backstory in the presentation. And if you go to WabanakieAlliance.com, they do have some of it if you're somebody who'd prefer to read the summary. I also will let you know we're getting ready, and Doretta will get this information at the EPC meeting tomorrow. We got a great toolkit of resources to help people advocate for this bill, including all of that background, because it does, I just want to acknowledge it can feel really overwhelming to take a stand on something that is complex and has a long history, and that you don't feel like you know all the details of. It's okay to not know all of the details of it, but it's also okay to ask for those details to build that confidence up. So we'll get those resources out. They're not in a way that I can share them right now, but you should start to see messages if you're on email lists from Maine Conservation Voters or anybody else. And I will figure out how to. I believe the easiest thing to do is just to go to our website, and it should be pretty clear how you can sign up.
That would be great. I did see a question back to the first bill that you talked about. Do you know what committee it will come before once it's printed?
The Environment and Natural Resources Committee.
Okay, ERC, Environment and Natural, ENR. What did I say?
ENR.
ENR. Yeah. I don't know where that came from. Sorry. So thank you for those important questions. For those of you who were in the 101 class last session, the reason it's so important to know the committee is because if you wanted to submit testimony in a written form or come the day of the hearing and offer testimony, you have to know which committee, because you sign up with them in this new world of COVID and Zoom. You sign up in advance to offer testimony. So it's good to know who's going to be hearing it. It's also good to know if your state rep or your state senator is on a committee that's hearing one of the bills that we're talking about, because then it's really important that you show up and say, I am your constituent and I am here as a person of faith. They will put down their phone and they'll stop eating their lunch and they will listen to you even more carefully. And we will hear more about all of those techniques and strategies next time when 3 former legislators join us to offer their feedback about what they've found to be most effective when people speak to them or spoke to them as legislators. The one other, and thanks, Marge is putting in the chat a way to look at what the committee structures are and who's on them.
And how to sign up.
And how to sign up, which and
right there at that link.
If you are giving testimony and your screen goes black and it says you're being removed from the room, do not panic and do not leave. It's just the way they're running the waiting room and putting you into the hearing room. So it's really important. Marge is right to give you those resources ahead of time so you know what to expect. On the tribal sovereignty bill, there's one other plug I would like to give, and I know Bruce Burnham is on this call tonight. There are several of us working with the 4 Directions Development Corporation, which was developed to help get home equity and home ownership onto tribal lands. And many churches in Maine gave grants or loans to that organization when it first got started, and those are starting to come due for renewal. And you will be hearing from us because we want you to think about forgiving them. It is an act of generosity of spirit, but also, dare I use the R word, reparation. It is something to think about prayerfully. If you are a church or adjudicatory that has given a loan and it's up for renewal, we're going to ask you to think about forgiving it. Maine Council of Churches was the first to forgive their loan of $25,000, and others have followed, and it means a lot. So keep your ears open for that opportunity as well. I want to thank all of our speakers here tonight for joining us, for sharing their wisdom. We have come to the end of another great session. Thank you, Doretta, Kathleen. Thank you, Beth and Marge. We're going to close tonight with just a very brief sending or commissioning. And I jotted down some of the things that you wrote in the chat at the very beginning of our time together tonight, those signs of spring. And I want you to listen to these so that the spirit of new life and hope might infuse you with energy to advocate for the well-being of our earth, of our health, and of our tribal neighbors, the First Nations of this place that we call Maine, the people of the Dawnland. Flowers, turkeys strutting, crocuses, lots of crocuses, baby irises, beautiful evening light and longer days, spring peepers, bluebirds, yellow finches, ducks after the rain, daffodils, the smell of warming soil, that ice has gone out on lakes, and that there's a gushing waterfall. That last one reminded me of the prophets in Hebrew scripture who talk about justice rolling down like streams. And that is what our work here tonight has been about, imagining and envisioning. And I'm so grateful that all of you were here. I invite you now, unless you are on the planning committee, in which case I ask you to stay on the meeting for a few minutes afterward. But for everybody else, go in peace, my friends. May you be held in the palm of God's hand until we meet again, which will be on April 27th. Amen. And good night to everybody. Have a good night. Thank you for being here.